my streaming service, Dark and Twisted TV, to watch my exclusive animated horror series, My Girlfriend Wants to Kill Me, and more. Others have joined, so what are you waiting for? Join today. Link in the description. Now on to the show. I'm sure you've all heard of the creepy college roommate horror stories that has been plastered all over the internet for the past few years. But I think my story is the craziest and most horrifying of them all. And by the end of this story, you will see why. I was overly excited to be accepted into Harvard University. Not many people can say the same thing. It was an honor, and my parents couldn't be more proud of me. Lots of hard work and studying had finally paid off. So the day had finally arrived, as my parents and I were on the road for over 2 hours driving there. For the entire ride, my parents not only bragged about how proud they were of me, but they also gave me so many warnings that it felt as if my ears were about to explode. Stay away from boys. Stay away from the booze. Stay away from those wild frat parties that are known to happen quite often during the college days. But I have to admit, I was a bit curious about the frat parties. Even though I doubted seriously that I would attend. I mean, I myself am an introvert, and the thought of parties and large crowds terrifies me. I know what you're thinking. Gosh, what a dork she is. But that's just me, and I don't apologize for being the way that I am. Also, I had decided to rent out a 2-bedroom house that was located directly behind the university, and I was to share it with a roommate. Anyways, we had just arrived at my new dwelling, and I was excited to start this new journey. But I have to admit, I was a little sad that I would be away from my parents for a while. But my father said, look, on the bright side, we would see each other during the holidays. Not to mention, we would FaceTime as well. Back in my parents' college days, they didn't have the luxury. So I picked up my bag, kissed them goodbye, and headed inside. I had just finished unpacking when the door slowly opened. There stood a female. She introduced herself as Kimmy, my new roommate. Later on that night, we ordered food and had gotten more acquainted. She was super nice and seemed like we were going to be great roommates. A few weeks had passed and the greatness had gone sour. Her cleanliness had transformed into dirtiness. She had become a slob. I usually came home late due to my working long hours at my new job as a waitress at the diner down the road. Anyone who works long, grueling hours knows that the last thing that you want to do when you come home is clean a dirty-ass house. I kid you not, every single night that I came home, she was passed out, drunk on the floor, and there would be a pool of vomit right next to her that she refused to clean up, and there would be piles of dirty dishes stacked up in the kitchen, as well as dirty laundry all over the place. And I know this sounds gross, but she even left bloody pads and tampons all over the bathroom floor and on the counter as well. We even had manifested a bug infestation. Huge black cockroaches everywhere. And get this, when I confronted her about it, she would deny everything and even had the nerve to blame it on me. This situation was out of control and had become toxic. So one night after I came home from work, she was not the only one drunk and passed out next to her own pool of vomit as usual. But there was some random, homeless-looking guy who was actually sleeping in my bed, and he reeked of pure vodka and cigarettes. It was horrendous. This was the last straw. I was done, beyond pissed off, fed up to capacity, and I started packing my things immediately. All I wanted to do is get the hell out of there. So I called up a friend of mine to pick me up and take me back to my parents' house, at least until I figured things out. So she picked me up and we hit the road. I was so glad to be out of that place and away from that psycho bitch. A week later, after being back home at my parents', it felt so good to be back in my old room where everything was neat and tidy. To be 100% honest, I was even starting to question if the college life was for me. I needed some time to sort things out, but in the meantime, I texted a few of my friends and we were going to meet up at the local pub to play pool, have some drinks, and just hang out. I asked my parents if I could take their car and they said yes, but I needed to be back at a decent hour, so I agreed and was on my way. As I traveled down the road, it began to downpour as well as lightning and thunder, and the thickening of the fog made it almost impossible to see the road. And then I heard something in the back seat, but I just figured it was my dad's bowling ball rolling back and forth on the floor, so I paid it no mind and focused on the road. Then, all of a sudden, there was a gun pressed firmly against my temple. It was Kimmy. You thought you could just leave me, huh? Abandon me like my mother abandoned me when I was a child. Well, if you refuse to live with me, I refuse to let you live, she said in a creepy whisper. I began to cry as the downpour of rain increased. Then, out of nowhere, we were sideswiped by a truck as the car spun out of control and landed in a ditch. Then everything went black. I woke up a week later in the hospital with a broken leg and a cracked rib, but luckily for me, I was wearing my seatbelt and the doctor said that I was going to be okay. When I asked what happened to Kimmy, he said she was not so lucky. She was dead at the scene. And that was the end of my college roommate nightmare. Stony had been my best friend for as long as I could remember. In school, we had spent most of our time either in the principal's office or after school detention instead of class where we should had been. We were always getting into mischief. We were like brothers, practical jokers, connected at the hip, a modern day Beavis and Butthead / Cheech and Chong. As we got older, everyone else matured, but we did not. We spent most of our time in the back of our van, getting high as hell while listening to Snoop Dogg, Wiz Khalifa, and a few other Get High bands. And it didn't stop there. It carried over into college. While our classmates were into football, basketball, and girls, we were into beer and weed. So much to the point that if you smelt the green, we were the ones smoking it. And you could hear the sounds of coughing and laughing from a mile away. As a matter of fact, we went by our nicknames. Mine was 420, as in the saying, it's 420 and time to get high. And Stony was his nickname because he was stoned 24 hours a day. We were voted in high school as the ones to not attend college, but we were sick of living at home with our parents telling us what to do. So we saw college as the perfect opportunity to get away and maybe learn something new as well. So there we were, our first day at Stanford, and we had decided to rent a house instead of a dorm. And I think you know why. It would be nearly impossible to smoke weed in a dorm, so there was not a snowball's chance in hell that was going to happen. We needed our Wheaties. One night, while watching scary movies and getting higher than a kite, we ordered some food due to a bad case of the munchies. So around 11:30 p.m., the pizza delivery guy arrived. So I grabbed some cash from the nightstand and answered the door. "Hey, what up, Holmes?" I said, my eyelids heavy, and I had a bad case of cottonmouth. "That'll be $35.57, he said. I honestly think he was overcharging for the pizza because he obviously knew that we were high, judging from the huge cloud of smoke that we were in, and he knew that we had the munchies. So I gave him the money and began to shut the door, but he halted me with his foot in the way. "Say, may I use your bathroom?" he said. I was about to say no, because usually I never let strangers in, but being high as hell, I said yes and let him in. An hour had passed and the guy was still in the bathroom, so we both knocked on the door to see if he was okay. But after knocking 6 times, there was still no answer, and it was dead silent. Then, all of a sudden, there was a loud gunshot. We kicked in the door, only to find the most gruesome scene. The guy was laying on the floor with a bullet hole in his head, and his brains were on the outside everywhere. The man must have been going through something and took his own life. But it was a mystery on why he killed himself in our bathroom. We both freaked the fuck out and went into full panic mode, then ran toward the front door just to get the hell out of there. The last thing we wanted was to be in a house with a corpse. As the door flung open, there he was, the delivery guy who had just killed himself in our bathroom. "What the fuck?" we yelled in sync. Then we slammed the door in his face. This was obviously the man's ghost. We then called the cops, but when they arrived and checked the bathroom, there was no body, no blood, and no brains. After being tested at the hospital, we learned that we had smoked a bad batch of weed, and it had us hallucinating the entire time. twisted, true story. My girlfriend, Jane, and I had been together for over 10 years and were deeply in love. Of course, like all couples, we had our fights, but for the most part, we got along exceptionally well. We even had plans to marry and have kids sometime in the future, and had always promised to be honest with one another no matter what. We never kept secrets. We were from the big city, and one thing that we had in common was we hated it. We wanted to relocate to a smaller town with a lower population, a place where we could settle down and raise a family. So one day, spontaneously, we decided to pack our things and move. I know this is going to sound crazy, but we had no destination in mind. We just packed everything that we owned into the trunk of our car, as well as the back seat, then hit the road. A nasty storm was brewing, so we decided to pull over at a gas station. We asked the attendant where we were. He said that we were in a small town in Colorado, and that is where we decided to live. A few months had passed with no luck in finding a permanent job. The jobs that we did find were only temporary and didn't pay shit to live off of. The little money that we had left with was almost gone, and we were in desperate need of cash and was on the verge of losing everything that we owned. We even considered moving back to the big city to move in with my sister and her husband. That was the last thing that we wanted to do. But the sand in our hourglass was beginning to run thin. 2 weeks later, and still no luck in finding jobs. So there I sat in our living room, waiting for Jane to get home from the grocery store. I was prepared to tell her that it was time to move back to the big city. But instead, I was greeted with her running up to me with a big smile, accompanied by a warm embrace. I had never saw her as happy as I did at that moment. At first, I thought that maybe she had won the lottery or something, but that was not the case. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, you're not going to believe this. I got a job as the manager of the grocery store, and they want me to start immediately. It pays very well," she said. We were so happy. Everything was perfect, or at least it appeared to be, for the moment. A couple of months went by, and financially, our lives had improved. Bills were paid ahead of time, and we even began to plan our wedding. But things started to happen that worried me. Such as, one day, I looked out of the window and noticed an expensive-looking car parked in our driveway. And I was surprised to find out that it belonged to Jane. She had purchased a brand new car. A car that looked too expensive for us to afford. But it didn't stop there. Her wardrobe had changed as well. She had started going on shopping sprees, and to make me feel better about it, She bought me expensive items as well, which I'm not gonna lie, I liked it. I tried not to question things because I didn't want to seem as though I wasn't grateful for our lives finally being better, and we didn't have to worry about money any longer. But something felt a bit off and uneasy, but I just continued to shrug it off and enjoy our new lifestyle. One day, while I was out, I had stopped by the grocery store that Jane was managing and wanted to surprise her with lunch. But when I asked one of the employees to get Jane for me, he told me there was no such person working there by that name. I figured that he was just new and didn't know who she was, but that didn't make sense because she was the manager and was the person in charge of hiring. So I asked to speak to the supervisor, who also confirmed that the first guy was right. Jane did not work there. As a matter of fact, no one had even heard of her. I even showed them her photo, but still they said they had never, ever saw her. Jane was obviously lying to me, but why? Why would she lie to me? And if that was the case, how was she getting all of that money? I had questions for Jane, and I rushed home to confront her. When I arrived back home, I yelled for Jane, but she wasn't home yet. I then noticed that she had bought one of those expensive new MacBook Pro laptops, and it was all spec'd out. Obviously very expensive, costing at least $6,000. Too much cash for a grocery store manager's salary. Something told me to open it, and that's exactly what I did, only to find that she had left her browser open to a website called OnlyFans. I had never heard of this website, but after Googling it, my mouth dropped open, and it felt as if time had stopped. It was a website where people traded sexual favors for cash. I was beside myself, and it got worse, much worse. Jane had a profile on there, a profile that was so disgusting and provocative that I can't even talk about what I saw. I immediately slammed down the lid, rushed downstairs, and waited for Jane to arrive back home. There I was, pacing the floor for over an hour, so much to the point that the carpet was beginning to wear thin. Then finally, her car pulled up in the driveway. I was so ready to give her a piece of my mind, as well as tell her that it was over between us and that I could no longer trust her. But then, all of a sudden, she ran inside, then slammed the door behind her. She was in panic. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, and before she could speak, I laid it on her. I told her that I knew all about her OnlyFans account and how she lied to me for months, and that was how she was getting her money. To my surprise, she didn't deny any of it. In fact, she told me that one of her clients turned out to be a rapist murderer who had recently escaped from prison, and she had no idea at the time when she met him. He lied and told her that he was an attorney for the rich. I tried to ask her more questions, but was immediately interrupted by her telling me there was no time to explain, and that the man was on his way to her house to kill her because she had told him that she was breaking it off with him after she had decided that she couldn't lie to me any longer. I began to panic myself and pushed the sofa and a few tables in front of the front and back doors. I even called the cops and told them that the rapist that they had been looking for was on his way to my home to kill my wife and I. But in typical cop fashion, they thought it was just a silly prank, then hung up on me. 2 minutes later, we heard the sounds of tires come to a halt in our driveway. And when I looked out of our window, there he was, sitting in a large black SUV. We immediately ran into the basement where I kept my hunting rifle. We were both so scared that we were shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to comfort her, but after what she had did, I just couldn't. Then we heard the basement door open. Seconds later, the heavy sounds of footsteps crept slowly down the stairs. I gripped my rifle tightly and was ready to open fire as the footsteps grew nearer. But then, out of nowhere, we heard sirens outside of our home, followed by the sounds of the man's footsteps briskly running back upstairs. 15 seconds later, we heard the sounds of gunshots and a huge thud on the floor above us. As we traveled back upstairs, there the man was, lying dead on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Apparently, Miss Nosy, our nosy next-door neighbor, called the police after seeing a suspicious-looking man enter our house with a gun. Thank God for nosy neighbors. It was my first time being back in my hometown since I moved to the UK 2 years ago. I was excited to see my mother, who I had always been close to, and we hadn't seen each other since I left. She was the best mother in the world, and I mean that from the heart. I would be staying for at least a month, and we had made plans to spend some mother and son quality time together. It's true what they say, there is no place like home. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, the memories of growing up sped through my mind like pages being flipped in a book. I was happy to be back home, and it felt quite nice. The following morning, I was awakened by the delicious aroma of my mother's breakfast food. By the way, my mother have always been a fantastic cook, so much to the point that she ended up selling her famous recipe for ridiculous sums of money back in the 1990s, enough to make her a wealthy woman. But my mother lived a modest life. My father died when I was only 13, and even though my mother didn't look her age and was considered by many as an overly attractive woman, she never remarried, which I respected. One night, I had arrived back home after being out with a couple of friends. Usually, that time of night, my mother was fast asleep, but I noticed her bedroom light was still on, so I wanted to check up on her. As I walked up the stairs, I noticed the sound of crying. It was coming from her room. So I knocked on the door and asked if she was okay. She told me to come on in, and when I did, there she was, lying there with tears pouring down her face. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" I asked. Then she patted the spot next to her as I sat down. I asked her what was the matter, and she told me that she needed to confess something. She had lost the majority of her money and was on the verge of losing everything, which came to me as a huge shock. I offered to lend as much money as I could from my savings account, but my mother was a stubborn woman and refused to take a handout from her son. However, I told her that she could just look at it as if it was a loan, but she still refused. She said that she would find some way to fix her problem and that she didn't want me worrying about her. So we called it a night and we discussed it no further. A week later, I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes, that she had found a way to take care of her debts. I was so happy to hear that and offered to cook dinner for her later that night. The following night, around 11 p.m., I noticed that my mother wasn't home yet. Earlier that morning, she had told me that she would be out with friends, but would be back around 8 p.m. for bed. My mother had always been a punctual person. Something was wrong, and I could feel it. I called her cell phone, but there was no answer. I was beginning to really worry. So I called up her friends that she had went out with that night, and each one of them said that she never showed up. They were worried as well. I knew that it would be a waste of time to call the cops since it hadn't been 48 hours in order to file a missing persons report. So instead, I went out to find her on my own. I had been driving around for over an hour with no luck when I got a call from a friend of mine. He told me that he had something that he wanted to tell me that would most likely upset me as well as gross me out. I told him to stop beating around the bush and just to tell me what the higgity hell he was talking about. He said that he couldn't bring himself to even say it and would send me a link on my phone instead. So I pulled over to the side of the road and waited for the link. When I clicked on it, it led me to a profile page on a website called OnlyFans, a sexually themed website where people did sexual favors for cash. And what I saw had not only brought me to tears, it made me nauseous as well. It was my mother's profile. I was shocked, speechless, hurt, as well as overcome with a feeling of disgust. My mother doing no telling what with and for strangers. How could she go so far into doing something so vile? What the fuck? It felt as if my entire world had been flipped upside down and inside out. I immediately sped home so fast that I almost crashed into the garage. I got out of my car, ran through the door, and headed upstairs to my mother's bedroom. I logged on to her computer and headed to the website. Luckily, I was able to guess her password, which just so happened to be my birth date. I shuffled through her inbox and saw a message from a man named Chad offering to meet up with her at his house for sex in exchange for cash. So I ran down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me and sped off down the road in search for my mother. When I arrived at the address, it was an old abandoned-looking house. Some of the windows were boarded up, while others were broken. I slowly creeped up to the garage and looked through the tiny broken windows when I noticed my mother's car inside. Then, all of a sudden, I heard screaming coming from the basement. I quickly ran to the back of the house, crawled through the back window, grabbed a baseball bat, then headed down to the basement. And there she was, my mother, tied to a chair, her face covered in bloody cuts. And appearing behind her was a man. He had a large knife in his hand. "Please don't kill me, Chad," cried my mother. But the man just stood there, smiling like the devil himself. So I reached inside of my pocket for my phone to call the cops, but noticed that I must have left it in my car. But as I turned around to leave, I accidentally knocked over a can of paint, startling the man. "Come back here, you little asshole," he yelled as I ran for dear life. I quickly hopped into my car and started the engine as he stood there in the middle of the street yelling at the top of his lungs like a lunatic. I then backed up my car, stopped, then slammed my foot on the gas, running the man over and killing him. 10 minutes later, the cops arrived and my mother was rescued and taken to the hospital. Thank God, the doctor said she was going to be fine and she was only a little dehydrated. They released her the following morning. Needless to say, my mother deleted her OnlyFans account and found another, more safer and respectable way to end her financial issues. And all was well. If you love horror at its finest, join my streaming service, Dark and Twisted TV, to watch my exclusive animated horror series, My Girlfriend Wants to Kill Me, and more. Others have joined, so what are you waiting for? Join today. Link in the description. Now on to the show. I had just moved back to New Orleans into an old house that was owned by my grandfather. He had left it to my grandmother when he died, who left it to me when she died. I was only going to live there temporarily because my plans was to flip it for a hefty profit. Before my grandmother died, she told me that I could sell it if I wanted to, because deep down inside, she knew I wanted nothing that belonged to my grandfather for good reason. Plus, there were things that went on in that house, mainly the basement, that scared me as a child. To be 100% honest, he was an asshole and treated everyone, including me, like shit. He was not a nice man, and everyone knew it. Plus, he was known for being into deep voodoo, casting spells on people to make their lives living nightmares. I guess That's why it was no surprise that someone or something killed him. Yes, that's how he died. Someone had put brain-rotting powder in his hat that caused his brain to explode. Yes, there are spells that dangerous here in New Orleans. By the way, when I was a child, my father went missing. He was presumed dead, and that's why I had to live with my grandparents, his parents. They are the ones who raised me, or shall I say, forced to raise me. As my grandfather always put it, he was very vocal when it came to that. I never knew my mother, so that's why I couldn't live with her. I had just arrived at the house and finished unpacking my things when there was a weather alert that a tornado was on its way. They said to go down to our basements for the best possible shelter. But this was not good news for me, seeing that I was terrified of basements, and this particular basement was the worst. You see, my grandfather used to lock me down there as punishment for so-called being bad. I guess his version of being bad was kids playing outside and having fun in the yard. When I was locked down there, I saw and heard things that were on the paranormal side. Come to find out, the basement was where he did voodoo. Rumor had it that he even sacrificed people down there, but that part was never proven. Anyways, there was another weather alert saying that the tornado had touched down not too far away from where I was. So I had no other choice but to go down into the basement. So I walked slowly down there as the floor creaked beneath me. And as soon as my foot hit the bottom stair, the power went out. This brought back the memories of being locked down there as a child, but I tried not to let my emotions get the best of me as I lit a candle and sat it on the table in the corner. The basement smelled of old rotting wood, and usually basement floors were made of concrete, but this floor was made of dirt. And there were wooden shelves that had glass jars on them. And in the jars looked to be dead, fleshy things floating in liquid. One had a pig's snout, and another a cow's tongue. And one had red liquid that appeared to be blood. And inside was an eyeball. I was thinking that it probably was just an eye from a goat or something. To be honest, these were typical ingredients for spells. But there was one larger jar sitting on a higher shelf and right next to a large black book. So I climbed up on the ladder to see what was inside. And when I looked inside of the jar, there was a severed human head floating around in liquid, and one of the eyes had been cut out from its socket, and on the book that was sitting next to it bore the words, "How to eat humans for immortality." I gasped. I freaked the fuck out and fell off of the ladder, falling face down on the dirt floor. And the jar that was holding the human head fell off of the shelf, landing next to me. The stench of its rotting flesh was unbearable, and it felt as if I was about to vomit. And then it dawned on me. The face on the head was the face of no other than my own father. My father, who who had gone missing when I was only 11 years old. I couldn't believe it. My grandfather had killed his own son just to give himself immortality. I stood to my feet and ran up the stairs and toward the door. But as soon as I was about to reach the door, it slammed shut, locking me down there. I screamed and banged on the door, but of course there was no one there to hear me. And then I heard a voice behind me. "You're going nowhere. You will die here, just like everyone else, including your stupid, pathetic father," said the voice of my grandfather coming from behind me. It was his spirit, and it was out for blood. I screamed and beat on the door harder. Luckily, the next door neighbor, Mrs. Nosy, heard me and let me out. I ran the fuck out of that basement and out of that house, and I never, ever looked back. After informing the police about the incident, they had discovered multiple people buried in that basement. My grandfather was indeed a dark and twisted man. My name is Zach Pryor. My wife's name is Natalie. We are flippers. For those of you that don't know what flippers are, we buy homes, condos, and apartments that are in desperate need of remodeling. Basically, these homes look like shit, but after we're done with them, they are spectacular and ready for us to sell for a hefty profit. A great business to go into to get rich. We used to be morticians, a huge shift in professions, I know. And being a flipper is honestly a lot less depressing. Anyways, we had just moved from Chicago, Illinois to Hoboken, New Jersey, and was excited to start our new lives together. We had placed our ads looking for crappy houses, then waited for our first client. One night, we had received a call from our first client, an old man saying that he was interested in us buying his house. He said that it was an old mansion that he and his wife lived in for many years, but she had died a few months prior, and he was in need of selling it. The house was just too big for him to remain in alone, he said. He said that we could take a look at it the following day around midnight, which was strange for any property owner to want to meet up at such a late hour, but we agreed anyway. And that was that. The next day, when we arrived at the house, there was an old, beat-up looking car sitting in the driveway. So we parked right behind it and exited the car. The house was not only old, as he stated very clearly on the phone, but it looked haunted and creepy as well. And I'm not even trying to be funny, but it looked like a house that Jason from Friday the 13th would live in, and where he would take his victims to torture and kill them. My wife and I are damn good flippers, but this house was almost unflippable. But we said fuck it and agreed to at least take a look at it. As we walked inside, the floor creaked so badly that I was almost certain we would fall through at any moment. So we called out to the man and asked if anyone was home. Down here in the basement, a voice said faintly, coming from below us. At first, we were hesitant due to the creepiness of the house, but then grabbed each other's hand and headed down. As we made it to the basement, there the man was, just standing there in the dark. I asked if he could turn on the lights, but he claimed there was none and that he never bothered to install them. He said he just used the natural light of the moon. The way he said it sounded rehearsed. We noticed right behind where he was standing, there was a large hole in the floor and a bag of cement that sat in the corner. My wife and I looked at each other. We knew something didn't feel right. You look familiar, said my wife to the man, who then smiled broadly, but in a creepy way. Then he said that he had a confession to make. He used to be her neighbor across the street back when she was single, and that he had been stalking her and watching her every move for the past few years. He confessed that he had been in love with her and he wanted me out of the picture in order to have her, and that's why there was a huge hole in the floor and a bag of cement. His plans were to bury me alive in that hole, then cover me up. But this man was seriously delusional if he honestly thought I was going to let him kill me and have my wife. You're fucking crazy, you old fart. We're out of here, I said as I grabbed her by the hand and we headed up the stairs. Then, all of a sudden, bam, I was hit in the back of the head with a shovel as I found myself tumbling down the stairs. Then everything went black. But to my surprise, when I opened my eyes, I was laying on a stretcher and was surrounded by the paramedics and the police. I gasped. Come to find out, while I was unconscious, the man had placed me in the hole and was about to cover me up with the cement when my wife found his rifle on one of the shelves and shot him in the back of the head, killing him, thus saving my life. That was the most terrifying day of our lives. And that was the end of my basement horror nightmare.